Three orphan sisters were days from being sent to the workhouse, their only crime their poverty, until a silent man with ghosts in his eyes heard a child's whispered prayer for a meal. In the Dust Devil Gulch territory, in the autumn of 1888, the wind was a thief. It stole warmth from the sun, stole the last of the leaves from the cottonwood trees, and stole the hope from the faces of most who lived there. The land was hard, and the people it raised were often harder. Inside the town's only general store, the air was thick with the scent of sawdust, cured meats, and quiet desperation. A man named Silas stood by the back barrels, his frame as still and unyielding as the granite hills he seemed to have been carved from. His face was a roadmap of some private sorrow, his eyes holding a distance that made other men look away. He was not of this town, he was merely in it, a spectre passing through, his silence a heavy cloak. It was a silence he had cultivated for years, a wall built stone by stone around a grief too vast to speak. He was watching a girl, hardly a woman, her shoulders slumped with a weight far heavier than the threadbare shawl draped over them. This was Ilara. Her hair, the color of sun-scorched wheat, was pulled back tightly, as if to keep her very self from unraveling. She placed a small, tarnished silver locket on the counter, its surface worn smooth by countless anxious thumbs. "Please, Mr. Gable," she pleaded, her voice a fragile wisp. "Just a small sack of flour." A bit of salt pork. The shopkeeper, a man whose heart had long since petrified, barely glanced at the locket. He pushed it back across the splintered wood. "Sentiment don't fill the belly, girl. And that trinket ain't worth the dust on it. You know what Mr. Blackwood said. No more credit." Behind Ilara, two smaller shadows clung to her skirt. The middle sister, Maya, stared at the floor, her small hands twisting the hem of her patched dress. The youngest, a tiny thing named Lily, looked up with eyes that were too large, too old, for her small face. They were dark pools of hunger, the skin around them bruised with exhaustion. It was then that Silas heard it, a sound that pierced the fortress of his silence. It wasn't meant for him, or for anyone. It was a prayer whispered into the dusty air by the smallest child. "Please," Lily breathed, her voice no louder than a rustling leaf. "We haven't eaten in days." The words were simple, a stark and brutal truth. They struck Silas with the force of a physical blow, cracking a fissure in the wall around his heart. He saw not just three orphans, but a reflection of a loss so profound it had hollowed him out. He saw the ghost of a small hand he could no longer hold, heard the echo of a laugh long since silenced. Ilara gathered her sisters, her face a mask of shame and defeat. She led them out into the biting wind, her dignity the only thing she had left to shield them. Silas watched them go. Then, his movements deliberate and devoid of any wasted motion, he stepped forward. He placed a heavy stack of coins on the counter, the sound a final, sharp pronouncement in the quiet store. He didn't speak. He simply pointed. A 50-pound sack of flour. A slab of salted pork. Bags of dried beans, cornmeal, sugar. The shopkeeper's eyes widened, his greed overriding his curiosity. Silas gathered the provisions, his silence more powerful than any argument, and walked out into the fading light. He followed the three small figures from a distance, their path leading to the edge of town where the decent folk didn't go, to a shack that looked as if it were one strong gust away from surrendering to the dust. He laid the heavy sacks on the rickety porch, knocked once, a solid and resonant sound in the dusk, and then, before the door could open, he melted back into the gathering shadows from whence he came. The food was a miracle, an answer to a prayer Ilara had been too weary to utter herself. She fed her sisters until their bellies were full for the first time in weeks, watching them with an aching mix of gratitude and suspicion. Mercy was a currency rarer than gold in this territory, and it seldom came without a price. The next morning, she found the price, or so she thought. The stranger, the silent man from the store, was on his knees by her porch, his large, calloused hands expertly replacing a rotten board. He worked with a quiet focus, his hammer blows measured and sure. He did not look up as she approached. "Sir," she started, her voice trembling slightly. We can't pay you for the food." Or for this." Silas finished hammering a nail before he finally rose, turning to face her. He was taller than she remembered, his presence immense. He gave a short, single nod, a gesture that seemed to dismiss the very notion of payment. He then picked up a loose shutter that was banging against the wall in the wind and began to mend its broken hinge. This became their new reality, a strange and silent ritual. Each day, Silas would appear at dawn. He never knocked. He simply arrived and found what was broken, and fixed it. He patched the leaking roof with shingles he seemed to conjure from nowhere. He meticulously sealed the cracks in the thin walls with a mixture of mud and straw, working against the coming cold. He chopped a mountain of firewood and stacked it neatly by the door. He moved with the grim purpose of a man atoning for a forgotten sin. The narrator could see the memories that drove him. In the precise way he planed a piece of wood, there was the memory of building a cradle. In the way his eyes would sometimes drift to the horizon, there was the ghost of a woman's smile, a life he had built and then watched crumble into ash. He was a veteran of a war, yes, but the deepest wounds had not come from a battlefield. They came from the silence of a home that grew too quiet, from the weight of a tiny coffin that was far too light. He had come west not to find a new life, but to bury the old one. Ilara watched him, her fear slowly giving way to a fragile, bewildering trust. She learned the man through his actions. His hands, though rough, were gentle with his tools. His gaze, though distant, missed nothing, not the way Maya shivered from a draught, nor the splinter in Lily's finger, which he wordlessly offered to remove with the tip of his knife, his touch as delicate as a surgeon's. Ilara's own past was a quieter, but no less painful, story. The fever had taken her mother first, then her father a week later. They had left their daughters with nothing but this shack on a parcel of land that the town's most powerful man, Mr. Blackwood, had coveted for years. Blackwood owned the town, its saloon, its bank, and its soul. He had systematically turned the townsfolk against the orphaned girls, painting Ilara as incompetent, the children as a burden. His cruelty was a slow poison, isolating them until they were utterly alone. In Silas's silent, steady work, Ilara felt a barricade being built, not just against the winter wind, but against the biting cruelty of the world. Each repaired board was a shield. Each stacked log, a bastion of warmth and defiance. The first frost coated the plains in a fine, silver dust, a beautiful and deadly warning of the winter to come. The air grew sharp, and the sun offered little more than a pale, watery light. It was on such a morning that the silence was finally broken, not by Ilara, but by the smallest sister. Lily, who had barely spoken a full sentence since her parents' passing, walked right up to Silas as he was sharpening an axe blade. Her small face was solemn. In her hand, she held a single, resilient prairie wildflower, a splash of defiant purple against the drab-brown landscape. She held it out to him. Silas froze. The rhythmic scrape of stone on steel ceased. He looked down at the child, then at the flower, and something shifted in his gaze. The ghosts in his eye seemed to retreat for a moment, making way for a profound and weary tenderness. Very slowly, he set down his tools. He wiped his hands on his trousers and then, with a reverence that seemed almost holy, his large, scarred fingers gently enclosed the tiny stem. He didn't smile, but the hard line of his jaw softened. He carefully tucked the wildflower into the worn leather band of his hat. It was a silent acceptance, a pact made between a broken man and a child who understood loss. Ilara watched from the doorway, her heart a tangled knot of emotions. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it was blooming in her chest, as stubborn and brave as that little wildflower. Later that day, she brought him a tin cup of hot water, her hands shaking. She stood before him, searching for the right words. Why, she finally managed to ask, the single word encompassing a universe of questions. Why the food? Why the repairs? Why this kindness? Silas took the cup, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting second. He didn't answer immediately. He looked over at Maya and Lily, who were huddled together near the fire pit, tracing patterns in the dirt. His gaze held them, protective and fierce. When he finally spoke, his voice was a low, gravelly sound, rough from long disuse. No one, he said, his words measured and heavy, should be hungry. It was not an explanation. It was a creed. Their quiet world was shattered a few days later by the arrival of Mr. Blackwood. He rode a fine black horse that matched his cold, black heart, and he did not dismount. He looked down on Ilara from his saddle, his face a mask of smug authority. "The town council has met," he announced, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "They've declared you an unfit guardian. It's for the best, you understand. The girls will be taken to the county workhouse on Monday. It's a clean place. They'll be taught a trade." He smiled, a cruel slash in his face. "As for the property, the town will repossess it to settle your parents' debts to my bank." From the side of the shack, Silas emerged. He said nothing. He simply came to stand beside Ilara, his presence a silent challenge. He was covered in sawdust and sweat, but he seemed to tower over the man on the horse. Blackwood sneered. "And who is this? Another stray you've taken in?" Silas's eyes narrowed, becoming chips of flint. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood as an immovable wall between the predator and his prey. Blackwood, though arrogant, was a coward at his core. He felt the raw, dangerous power emanating from the silent man and spurred his horse back. "Monday," he shouted over his shoulder. "Be ready." The week passed under a sky the color of lead. A heavy dread settled over the small shack, thicker than any frost. Ilara held her sisters close, telling them stories of sunshine and spring, her voice a brave lie against the coming storm. She packed their few meager belongings into a small bundle, her hands moving with a numb, mechanical grief. On Monday morning, the air was still and frigid. A small crowd of townsfolk gathered at a distance, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and feigned indifference. They were sheep, and Blackwood was their shepherd. He arrived precisely at 9, the town sheriff at his side, a man whose spine was as flexible as his paycheck demanded. "It's time, Ilara," Blackwood said, his tone final. Ilara stepped out onto the porch, her two sisters clutching her hands. Her body trembled, but her chin was high. Her eyes, clear and defiant, met Blackwood's. She would not let him see her break. Just as the sheriff took a step forward, a figure emerged from the east road, walking into the center of the unfolding drama. It was Silas. But it was a Silas no one had seen before. He was clean-shaven, the sharp, sorrowful lines of his face laid bare. He wore a dark, formal suit coat, old and slightly frayed, but clean and pressed. It was the coat of a man attending a funeral, or a wedding. He walked with an unshakable purpose, ignoring the crowd, his eyes fixed only on the confrontation at the shack. In his hand, he held two folded documents. He stopped directly in front of Blackwood and the sheriff. Without preamble, he unfolded the first paper. "This," Silas said, and the sound of his voice, clear and steady, stunned the onlookers into silence, "is the deed to this property. Lot 17. And the adjoining lot, 18. I purchased it from the county registrar's office in Silver Creek yesterday morning. Paid in full." Mr. Blackwood's lien is void. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Blackwood's face went from smug to purple with rage. This is impossible. A vagrant like you." Silas ignored him, his focus absolute. He unfolded the second document. It was a formal declaration, signed and stamped by the circuit judge. He then turned his back on Blackwood and faced Ilara. The entire world seemed to shrink to the small space of the porch. His gaze, for the first time, was not distant or haunted. It was direct, intense, and filled with a raw, desperate vulnerability. "Miss Ilara," he began, his voice softening, the gravelly edges worn smooth by the weight of his words. "I am a man of some means. I have a military pension. I have land. I ask for your hand in marriage." He said it not as a poet, but as a builder stating the foundation he could provide. "To make this a family. To give these children a name. To protect them." Tears began to stream down Ilara's face, hot trails on her cold skin. She looked from this impossible, stoic man to the terrified faces of her sisters. She saw not a loveless proposition, but a lifeline. She saw a man offering to stand in the breach, to take the blows the world aimed at them. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own brokenness, and the quiet, fierce promise of a shared healing. Her nod was small, but it was the strongest thing she had ever done. "Yes," she whispered, her voice ringing with the clarity of a bell. Yes, the silent cowboy had spoken, and with a few simple words, he had built a fortress of hope where none had stood before. A year later, the spring sun bathed the plains in a generous, golden light. The wind was no longer a thief, but a gentle messenger, carrying the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. The dilapidated shack was gone. In its place stood a small, sturdy farmhouse, its windows bright, its porch solid and welcoming. A vibrant garden flourished beside it, a patchwork of green shoots promising a summer bounty. This was not the Dust Devil Gulch territory, this was home. On the porch, Silas sat on a stool, his large hands guiding Maya's smaller ones as they worked a piece of soft pine wood with a knife. He was teaching her to whittle, his movements patient, his voice a low, gentle rumble. Not far away, Lily, the girl who had been silenced by grief, chased a pair of yellow butterflies, her laughter spilling into the warm air, a sound more precious than any birdsong. Ilara emerged from the house, a basket of laundry on her hip. The gaunt, haunted look had vanished from her face. Her eyes shone with a quiet, steady light, and a soft color had returned to her cheeks. She was no longer a survivor, but a creator, a nurturer of this new life. She and Silas still lived in a world of comfortable quiet. Their love story was not written in passionate declarations, but in the shared rhythm of daily life, the solid thud of his axe splitting wood, the gentle scrape of her hoe in the garden, the way he would look up and watch her, a silent question in his eyes, and the way she would smile back, a silent answer. As she hung a white sheet on the line, she watched him with her daughters. He glanced up, as if feeling her gaze, and their eyes met across the yard. For the first time since she had known him, a true smile spread across Silas's face. It was slow, hesitant, like a sunrise after a long night, and it transformed him, erasing years of sorrow from his features. She smiled back, a full, genuine smile that reached her eyes. The ghosts were still there, she knew, in the deepest part of him, but they no longer wandered his heart like restless spirits. They rested now, peacefully, beside the vibrant, growing life he had fought so hard to build. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. He walked over to her, his boots silent on the soft earth. He opened his hand. Lying on his palm was a small, exquisitely carved bluebird, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. It was a mate to the one he had always carried, the one that represented his lost daughter. He gently placed the new carving into Ilara's palm, his rough fingers lingering on hers. It was not a ring, but it was a vow. It was the promise of two broken wings learning to fly, together. If this story of two lonely souls finding redemption in the vast, unforgiving frontier stirred your heart, if you believe that kindness is a shelter and that love can be built with quiet hands and a steady heart, then we invite you to become a part of our community. Subscribe to our channel for more tales that honor the resilience of the human spirit. Like this video to help us share it with others, and tell us in the comments what a family truly means to you. Join us, where every story is a testament to the quiet strength that binds us all.